The drone footage lasted less than 10 seconds, a shaky flight over a forgotten ravine. Its camera meant to capture wildlife. Instead, it revealed something else, a flash of faded red, half buried in brush, a collapsed tent. The coordinates matched a stretch of wilderness where no one had camped in years. And it was the very place where Lena Hartwell, 27 years old, had vanished without a trace 7 years earlier for her family. The silence had been endless. But that brief clip proved one thing. The mountain had been keeping a secret all along. Lena had always been restless in the best sense of the word. She wasn't reckless. But she was drawn to silence, to landscapes where the world seemed untouched. A freelance photographer, she sold pictures of cloud-wrapped ridges and starfields over alpine lakes to magazines that rarely credited her by name. It didn't matter. What mattered was the chase, the long hikes, the miles of solitude. The frozen mornings when she waited for the sun to paint the snow gold. Her brother Mark often teased her. "One day the mountain's going to keep you," she'd laugh, shaking her head, promising she knew her limits. Lena was cautious. Extra batteries for her GPS, laminated maps, spare rations tucked in waterproof bags. If anyone could survive a wrong turn, it was her. On the morning of October 14th, she left her cabin outside Hamilton, Montana, the air sharp with frost. A neighbor saw her loading her Jeep, tripod, camera bag, a leather journal she carried everywhere. She waved as she drove past. A flash of red jacket in the pale morning light. By late afternoon, Mark received her last message, a windswept selfie on a ridgeline, eyes squinting against the sun, captioned simply, "One last shot before sunset." At the time, he smiled, imagining the photo she'd return with hours later. When her phone stayed silent, he assumed she'd lost reception. The next morning, unease crept in. Her Jeep sat parked neatly at the Bitterroot trailhead, keys tucked in the console. Water bottle half drained in the cup holder. On the dashboard lay her lens cap, as if dropped in a hurry. But there was no Lena. The search began within hours. Rangers swept the trail she had logged at the station. Dogs caught her scent briefly near a creek, but lost it in rocky terrain. Helicopters scanned the ridgelines, blades echoing across canyons. Volunteers combed switchbacks, calling her name into forests that swallowed sound. Day 2 brought more urgency. Her bright red jacket should have been visible from the air, yet every ridge revealed only shadows and stone. By the third day, over 100 searchers joined in. Locals, Forest Service crews, even off-duty firefighters. Campfires dotted the valley at night as teams planned routes by lantern light. Mark stood at the command post clutching her last photo. A ranger assured him delays weren't unusual. Twisted ankles, wrong turns. But Mark shook his head. "You don't know my sister. She always comes back." On the 6th day, a sudden snowstorm swept in. Winds howled through the trees, erasing tracks, blanketing the ground. Whatever faint traces of her passage had remained were gone by morning. Ranger Elena Vasquez, who had worked those mountains for 30 years, stared into the storm and whispered to her partner, "It's like the mountain decided to keep her." By the 8th day, the official search wound down. Crews returned exhausted, dogs limping, equipment iced over. The report used the language that Mark hated most. Presumed missing, presumed dead. But presumed is not proof. At home, Mark refused to accept it. He kept her cabin as it was. Maps spread across the desk, boots by the door, camera batteries charging in a row. At night, he drove back to the trailhead, sitting in her Jeep, breathing in the faint pine scent of her soap. He whispered her name into the dark as if the mountain might answer. It never did, and so the years stretched on. Vigils shrank, media attention faded. The Bitterroot trail she walked that morning grew quiet again, but Mark never stopped looking. Because he believed one thing: mountains don't erase people. Somewhere, in stone or snow or silence, there was an answer. 7 years later, the answer arrived, not from a ranger, not from a hiker, but from the unblinking eye of a drone drifting across the sky. The first winter after Lena's disappearance felt endless. for her family. Each storm that buried the Bitterroot Mountains seemed to seal her fate deeper into the wilderness. Yet Mark Hartwell refused to let her memory drift quietly into the snow. Every month, he drove back to the same trailhead where her Jeep had been found. He'd sit in the driver's seat long after dark, staring at the map still tucked in the glove box. The lens cap she had dropped on the dashboard remained there like a silent witness. To Mark, it wasn't just plastic. It was proof she had meant to return, proof she had been interrupted. At first, the community rallied. Dozens joined candlelight vigils, voices rising in prayer outside the ranger station. Flyers with Lena's smiling face appeared on bulletin boards in gas stations and diners across Montana. Strangers on the internet created pages dedicated to finding Lena. Hikers posted photos of ridgelines, asking if anyone recognized them from her portfolio. But as the months passed, hope thinned. The official case file grew cold. Rangers logged their final report. Area exhausted, no additional leads. Local newspapers ran smaller and smaller blurbs. National media, once drawn to the mystery of a young photographer swallowed by the mountains, moved on to fresher tragedies. By the second year, vigils dwindled. The circle of candles shrank. Even the most faithful volunteers stopped attending, one by one. People accepted the story everyone tells themselves when no answers come, that nature is merciless. And Lena had become one more name in a long list of vanished hikers. But not Mark. He dropped out of college in his third year, trading textbooks for topo maps. He worked seasonal jobs, construction in the summer, plowing snow in the winter, saving every dollar to fund his own searches. He bought used drones, rented thermal cameras, and scoured forums where amateur sleuths speculated on disappearances in national parks. Every trail he walked became an interrogation. He knelt beside creeks, turning over stones, searching for scraps of fabric. He studied the hollows of trees as if they might yield her journal. Nights he couldn't sleep. He pored over weather reports from that week in October, memorizing storm paths, imagining how Lena might have moved to shelter. His obsession was not quiet. Friends pulled away, unable to endure the constant weight of his grief. Employers let him go when his focus slipped. "You're chasing shadows," one of them told him. But Mark didn't care. He lived inside the silence his sister had left, and it consumed him. Locals began to tell their own stories. Hikers whispered about the Hartwell Trail, a stretch of switchback where, they claimed, Lena's laughter could still be heard on cold nights. Some swore they saw flashes of red on distant ridges. Others whispered darker tales, that the mountains hid hermits, or old miners who never left their tunnels, men who might have taken her. The internet was worse. On true crime forums, theories sprawled like wildfire. She staged her own disappearance. She was taken by a cult rumored to operate deep in the wilderness. She wandered too close to something she wasn't meant to see. Mark read every one. Sometimes he argued. Sometimes he just saved them. A growing digital archive of half-truths and speculation. By the fourth year, reality pressed heavier. Bills piled up. His parents moved away, trying to leave Montana's shadows behind. But Mark stayed, bound to the Bitterroots by something stronger than hope. It was anger now, a refusal to let silence be the final word. Each October, on the anniversary of her disappearance, he hiked the same trail, boots crunching over stone and pine needles. He'd leave a new photo of Lena at the trailhead, taped to the weathered board where old missing person posters curled in the wind. 7 times he made that walk. 7 times he returned with nothing. And yet, something about the 7th year felt different. Maybe it was the way storms had reshaped the slopes, opening gullies where before there had been only brush. Maybe it was chance. Or maybe the mountain had simply grown tired of keeping it secret, because on a bright morning in late September, a drone operator launched his quadcopter above a remote valley. He was searching for elk, recording footage for a wildlife channel. The drone's camera skimmed across trees, tilted toward the ravine floor, and captured 6 seconds of footage that would change everything. A flash of faded red, a collapsed tent. When rangers received the clip, They froze. The coordinates aligned almost perfectly with the zone Lena was believed to have vanished in for years. Search teams had circled the area, scoured ridges, mapped caves, but no one had ever entered that particular ravine. It was steep, hidden, and almost impossible to reach on foot. And yet there it was, a tent that should not have been there. When investigators replayed the footage in slow motion, they noticed something else. Just before the clip ended, the camera caught a shadow flickering across the brush, a shape that didn't match the trees. Blurred by sudden movement, Mark received the call that evening. His hands shook as he listened, breath shallow, after 7 years of silence. The mountain had finally spoken, but what it revealed would raise questions darker than the ones he had carried all those years. The ravine where the drone had captured the footage was not on any trail map. From above, it looked like nothing more than a tear in the earth, a steep wound hidden by pine and shadow. Few hikers even knew it existed. Those who did avoided it. The terrain was unstable, the descent treacherous, and the climb out nearly impossible without ropes. But after 7 years of silence, the coordinates from that shaky clip became the focus of a full-scale mission. On the morning of October 2nd, a team of rangers and search and rescue specialists gathered at the trailhead, ropes coiled, helmets fastened, radios checked for some of them. This was not the first time they had searched for Lena Hartwell. Age had crept into their faces since those frantic days years before. But the memory of her missing case lingered like an unfinished story. Mark stood at the edge of the staging area, pale, clutching Lena's leather journal that he had recovered from her cabin. It was the only thing of hers he had left. He wasn't allowed on the descent. Liability rules, but he refused to leave. At 9:17 a.m., the first climbers rappelled into the ravine. The walls were sheer and slick from recent rains, streaked with moss and shale. Every footstep dislodged pebbles that clattered into the shadows below. Radios crackled with short updates. Anchor secure, Team 1 descending, visibility limited. And then, 20 minutes later, a voice cut through. Visual on object, red fabric confirmed. The team reached a narrow ledge where a tent lay collapsed, its nylon shredded and faded, rainfly tangled in branches. Dirt and pine needles had half buried it, but the structure was unmistakable, a campsite, hidden from the world for 7 years. Inside, the silence felt heavier than the mountain air. The tent was not empty. Scattered across the floor were scraps of wrappers, a dented metal cup, and a journal. Weathered but intact, its cover was scratched, the leather warped by moisture. But the pages inside still clung to legibility. Rangers flipped carefully, gloves brushing across Lena's handwriting, meticulous sketches of ridgelines, notes about star positions, lists of edible plants. And then, abruptly, the final page, a single sentence trailed off midline. The ink smudged as though written in haste. Not alone here. Those 3 words froze the team. Back at the surface, when Mark was handed the journal, he pressed his palm against the cover like it was her hand. He read the last line once, twice, his voice cracking. Not alone here. The question hung unspoken. Who had been with her? Investigators expanded their search. They swept the ravine floor, scoured ledges, dug through undergrowth just beyond the tent. They discovered a crude stone wall, stacked knee-high in a rough semicircle. It looked like a barrier, hastily built, as though Lena had tried to defend her camp from something or someone. Nearby, they uncovered bones. At first, the team braced for the worst, but analysis revealed they weren't human. Animal remains, picked clean, scattered around the wall, a survival camp, but one marked by unease. Forensic experts cataloged everything: the cup, the wrappers, the journal. Soil samples were taken, fibers bagged. The case, dormant for years, roared back to life. But the drone footage still held one more puzzle. When analysts replayed the 6-second clip frame by frame, the blurred shadow at the edge of the brush took shape. Not a tree, not wind, a figure, upright, moving quickly out of sight. The possibility chilled even seasoned rangers. If Lena had been alive longer than presumed, Had someone else been there? Had she encountered someone in the mountains? Someone who didn't want her found? Mark obsessed over the footage. He enlarged the stills, traced outlines, convinced himself he saw shoulders, a head tilted downward. She wasn't alone, he whispered. She knew it. Detectives reopened the old files. They re-examined weather reports, old witness statements, even interviews with hunters and trappers who had roamed those ridges. One old miner swore he'd seen smoke rising from a canyon years after Lena's case had gone cold. Another hiker claimed he once stumbled on crude shelters deep in the forest, built from stone and bark. None of it could be verified. Yet Lena's journal now suggested she had discovered something, and someone, hidden in the wilderness. Theories multiplied, forums reignited. Buzzing with speculation, she stumbled upon hermits still living off the land. There were poachers or smugglers using the ravine as cover. She uncovered something ancient, something meant to stay buried. For Mark, the theories didn't matter. What mattered was proof. His sister had survived. If only for weeks, she had fought to endure. She had left him a final message. But that message raised darker questions than silence ever had. The official investigation prepared for a second sweep of the ravine, this time with ground-penetrating radar and forensic teams. As Mark waited, clutching the journal, one thought consumed him. If Lena wasn't alone, then who else was out there? The ravine did not give up its secrets easily. 2 weeks after the tent was found, investigators returned with heavier equipment. Ground-penetrating radar scanned beneath the soil. Forensic dogs circled the stone wall and pawed at loose earth. Archaeologists from a nearby university were even brought in, tasked with distinguishing between human traces and the remnants of old mining camps rumored to the Bitterroots. The results unsettled everyone. Just beyond Lena's collapsed tent, radar picked up voids in the rock wall, tunnels, narrow and deep, carved decades earlier during failed mining expeditions. Most had long since collapsed, but one entrance remained intact, concealed by brush and a fall of stone. It was almost invisible until the search team cleared it. Inside, the air was damp and cold, carrying the faint smell of ash. Torchlight revealed crude markings on the walls. Not miners' graffiti, but symbols scratched in soot and ochre, spirals, jagged lines, stick-like figures. Some were recent, still dark against the stone. At the back of the first chamber, they found remains of fire pits. Animal bones, cracked and blackened, littered the floor. A crude rack of branches leaned in one corner, hung with strips of dried sinew. Whoever had used this place had done so within the past decade, perhaps even more recently. But no human remains, no Lena. Mark wasn't allowed inside. But when rangers described the site to him, his face drained. "She wrote about this," he whispered, holding up her journal, flipping to the sketches. He showed them a drawing, jagged rock spires, the outline of a hollow opening. Beside it, in shaky handwriting, "Not alone here." It was the last line she had ever written. Theories multiplied overnight. Some investigators leaned toward the possibility of illegal camps, trappers, poachers, or squatters surviving off the grid. Others suspected cult activity. The symbols on the walls resembled nothing recorded in mining history. They looked ritualistic, deliberate. The deeper they searched, the stranger the clues became. From a crack in the chamber floor, a fragment of cloth was pulled, faded blue, consistent with the shirts Lena was known to wear. Soil tests confirmed human blood traces in the same spot, though too degraded for DNA. Then came the most chilling find. Wedged in the stone wall was a small scrap of paper, brittle but legible. It had torn free from the back of Lena's journal. Written in her handwriting were 4 words: "They watch from above." The discovery rattled even the most seasoned detectives. Who was she writing about? What had she seen? As news spread, the case took on a life of its own. Media swarmed the Bitterroots. Reporters speculated about hidden communities, long-forgotten hermits, even links to unsolved disappearances in neighboring states. On forums, users traded stills of the drone footage, circling the blurred figure, claiming to see eyes, hands, a face. Mark refused to speak publicly. Instead, he sat with Lena's journal every night, tracing her words with trembling fingers. To him, the message was not metaphor. It was warning. The search of the tunnels continued for 3 more weeks. Teams mapped every passage. But collapses blocked deeper exploration. No footprints, no clothing, no signs of Lena herself. It was as if she had walked into the earth and vanished. But then came the footage, a forensic analyst, reviewing the drone clip for the 100th time, enhanced the frames where the shadow figure appeared with stabilization. The blur sharpened slightly. The outline suggested shoulders, a head, limbs in motion, but one detail stood out: height. The figure was tall, abnormally tall, close to 7 feet by comparison to nearby brush. The revelation electrified the case. Whatever Lena had encountered was not just another hiker. It was something else. Mark's grief sharpened into obsession. She saw them, he insisted. She tried to tell us. She was never alone out there. Detectives urged caution, refusing to leap to conclusions, but privately. Even they admitted unease. The Bitterroots had a long history of folklore, whispers of watchers in the hills, strange fires glimpsed at night, echoes of voices with no source, old stories dismissed as myth. Until now, the investigation closed its official update with careful words. Evidence suggests the presence of other individuals in the area concurrent with Hartwell's disappearance. It was a sterile way of saying something far darker. She wasn't alone. And if she wasn't, someone or something had ensured she would never return. Mark stood at the trailhead on the anniversary of her disappearance, staring into the tree line. In his hands, he held the journal, its final page marked forever by those words. Not alone here. They watched from above. The wind rattled branches like whispers, and for the first time, Mark believed the mountain wasn't just silent, it was listening. By the time winter returned to the Bitterroots, the official search had ended once more. The tunnels were sealed. The ravine declared unsafe for further entry. The report closed with cautious wording. Cause of disappearance, undetermined, for investigators. It was an acceptable ending. For Lena's family, it was another wound. Mark refused to accept the closure. To him, the journal was proof that his sister had survived longer than anyone thought, that she had fought to endure, that she had seen something no one else believed. He carried it everywhere, pages worn from his touch. The final line haunted him most. They watched from above. Who were they? Theories spread like wildfire. Television specials framed Lena's story as the latest in a string of wilderness vanishings. Internet forums dissected every detail of the drone footage. Some argued the tall figure was nothing but distortion, branches bending in the wind. Others swore it was evidence of hidden hermits, descendants of old miners who never left the tunnels. A few whispered darker possibilities, connecting the case to ancient legends of watchers in the mountains. Mark ignored the noise. He focused on one truth. Lena had not died alone in the first storm. She had lived, had written, had fought. Someone had been there with her. In the spring, a memorial plaque was placed at the Bitterroot trailhead. It bore her name, dates, and a simple engraving. She walked where silence speaks. Hikers left flowers and stones beneath it. Some claimed they felt watched as they stood there, but the case refused to rest. One evening, months after the ravine was closed, Mark returned home to find a padded envelope on his doorstep. No return address. Inside, wrapped in plain brown paper, was a photograph. The image showed a woman standing against a rock wall, hair longer, face thinner, eyes hollow. She looked directly at the camera. Across the bottom was a date stamp, October 2021, 2 years earlier. Mark's knees buckled as he stared at the photo. It was Lena, older, worn, but alive. The photo was blurred, as if captured in haste, yet unmistakable. She had been out there long after the world had given up. But how? And why had she never come back? He showed the picture to authorities. They dismissed it as doctored, without metadata, without proof of origin. It was meaningless in the official record. But to Mark, it was all he needed. The mountains had not taken his sister. Something in them had kept her. Theories spiraled again, that Lena had been held by reclusive hermits, forced to live in isolation, that she had chosen not to return, changed by something she had seen, that the watchers she described were real and still out there. The Bitterroots grew quieter after that. Hikers avoided the ravine. Rangers spoke of unease, as if eyes followed them on patrol. And at night, some locals swore they saw faint fires flickering in the distance, vanishing when approached. For Mark, the search never ended. He dedicated his life to chasing answers, building networks of volunteers, documenting other disappearances in national parks. Everywhere he looked, he found patterns, clues that whispered of something bigger, something just out of reach. Lena's story became legend. Campfire tales spoke of the young photographer who vanished into the wilderness and left behind words that chilled even the most hardened rangers. Her journal was passed around as evidence, photocopied on internet forums, studied line by line, and yet, no matter how many times people argued, the truth remained hidden because the mountain does not give up its secrets easily. Years later, standing once more at the trailhead beneath the plaque, Mark spoke quietly to the air. "I know you're still out there." The wind hissed through the trees in reply. Some vanishings end with bones and closure. Lena's did not. Her story closed not with an answer, but with a warning. The last line of her journal, etched forever into his mind, seemed less like a diary entry and more like prophecy. Not alone here, they watch from above. And even now, as hikers tread carefully through those trails, many swear they feel it, the weight of unseen eyes, the silence that listens, because some places do not just hide secrets, they keep them.